Joseph Crosby. I'm the owner and president of Happy Viking Games. I'm here with good friend, Pro Tour Paris winner, likely future Hall of Fame member, Ben Stark.
How's everyone doing?
So Ben, you've been here for the whole pre-release. How's it been?
It's been a lot of fun. I love the pre-release.
Did you enjoy the commentating and all the feature matches and everything?
Absolutely. I mean, doing commentary is one of my new favorite things to do. And playing in a pre-release is like when playing is most exciting because the cards are new and, you know, even after going over the spoiler, you don't remember everything. So sometimes someone plays a card and you're like, whoa, what is that? You know?
I know I advertised in advance that the excitement was going to be palpable. Did it feel that way when you're here and you're interacting with everyone?
Oh, yeah, I mean, you know, I had a lot of fun, and it seemed like a lot of the people had a lot of fun. I got to talk to them about their decks and, you know, play some games with a lot of the people here, and everyone seemed to really enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, kind of the last thing for the weekend we've wanted to do is go over your decks in more detail. We've gotten to watch them on camera. This is the first deck that you had on Friday night for the midnight release. You chose Selesny as your guild, and then you received Orzhov. I know, talking to you before the feature match coverage, you'd mentioned that you actually thought this deck was a little below par.
Yeah.
You want to tell us more about that?
Sure, yeah. Well, you know, this deck's pretty good, but everyone's deck's going to be good when you are getting guild packs and whatnot. And I don't really have much spot removal, as you can see. My only ways to kill a creature are Smite, and I might not even be able to block and Smite with a brand new to kill. Really, I mean, then I have the white Illuminate Primordial here. And, you know, those really are my only ways to kill a creature at all, and they're not even very reliable ways to kill a creature since Primordial costs 7 and Smite is situational. And oftentimes I find in Seal deck, you know, it comes down to being able to deal with their rares and their, you know, their bomb cards.
Sure, at that point, especially with the 2 guild packs, you're anticipating that bombs are not unlucky in some way, they're just a factor of the game you're going to have to deal with.
They're going to exist and I'm going to have to deal with them.
So one thing I found interesting from observing your matches and getting feedback from your opponents is, although you thought this deck was, like I said, a little below average, it seemed your opponents were extremely impressed with the deck. What they would point out was Collective Blessing, Tesa, and your accelerants, which were causing those to come into play faster than normal. And we've also had a lot of discussion about Dragon's Maze slowing the format down to some degree, especially compared to Gatecrash. And Seal deck in general is a little slower. But despite all of that, you still think that this deck was a little below average.
Yeah, I mean, I think this deck is fine. I think it's good, but I think it's a little below average. You know, everybo's deck. In this day and age, I find a phenomenon that you always see is that everyone thinks their deck's amazing. You know, I don't think this deck is bad, but I think that a lot of the decks you're going to face in a tournament are going to be better than this. I mean, in a pre-release, okay, you know, everybody's here to have fun. It's not all the world deck builders. But you know, if I had this exact same deck in a GP, I would feel like, you know, this is a good deck maybe for round 4, but by the time I was playing round 8, you know, at 7-1 or something, I would face better decks on average.
Gotcha. Okay, with that out of the way, how did you choose Selesnya as your guild?
I've always found Selesnya to be the best guild in Return to Ravnica. I mean, they're all good, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, but in terms of just overall power level, I mean, I've won the most on Moto with my Selesnya decks. I just think it's the strongest, to be honest.
Okay, and were you happy that you received Orzhov?
I'm very happy. I actually think Orzhov is the best deck in Gatecrash, the best guild, and I wasn't able to choose the Gatecrash one. You just receive a complementing guild. So basically I could have received any guild except the Mirror, I believe. And I just got very lucky and happened to get Orzhov.
Well, now that you've had a chance to play with both the cards in this deck and play Dragon's Maze in general, are you satisfied with the new set? Do you think it's a good complement to the first 2?
Yeah, I think they did a very good job. I think that often in draft formats, it can be a little bit stale when you're only doing one of the sets because it's designed for all 3 to be there, basically. And Gatecrash itself was very aggressive. The cheap cards were very powerful, so you know it wasn't that fun when most of the games ended so quickly. But once you add in Dragon's Maze, I think it's going to balance out a little bit. The cycle of 2/4 creatures that interact with gates, they all are very playable, and they're going to stop the Gatecrash aggression because you're, you know, playing a 2/4 that gives you 7 life, a 2/2 kills a small creature, and then you get a 2/4 body.
Absolutely. I'm sure anybody who is following our stream heard me on many occasions say how the 2/4 for green is kind of a pet card of mine. So.
Yeah, and that card's sweet. I mean, 7 life is really gonna, you know, and no beatdown deck is gonna be happy if you gain 7 life and you put a 2/4 creature into play on your 4th turn or 5th turn of the game, you know.
So oftentimes in a deck tech, we would start out discussing how you made the decision to play these colors. But given the nature of getting a guild pack, it's pretty straightforward that you're gonna play these colors. So why don't you kind of break down the cards that are in the deck, how they interact. Tell us more about why you think this is subpar, because clearly no one's disputing that these aren't great bombs, and particularly you have Collective Blessing and Ready and Willing. Now, Ready and Willing, I think, might deserve a little bit of a spotlight on its own, because I didn't recognize its power as immediately as you did, and in your mind, right, it's one of, if not the best cards in this deck.
Right, definitely. Collective Blessing and Ready and Willing are what I would call tier 1 bombs, like near unbeatable. If you just have creatures out and you play either of those cards, it's going to be very hard to lose. They both cost 6. I mean, if you play Willing or Ready, you could very easily lose, but if you can play Ready and Willing, your opponent's going to be in a heap of trouble.
I watched you play opponents into some pretty miserable circumstances with Ready Willing on a consistent basis.
Yeah, if this deck is a little better than I thought, it's probably because of the strength of Ready and Willing.
Really, just that one card alone?
It is fantastic. I mean, you know, this deck doesn't have removal, has plenty of creatures. The creatures aren't very good. I mean, if you take a look at my creatures, I mean, this Dry and Militant has almost no place in the deck. It's just in there because my curve is...
I was going to ask you about that specifically. Considering that your deck is not an aggressive Selesnya deck, we're not looking at a bunch of 2-drops, we're not looking at a bunch of pump spells. With that in mind, this does seem out of place, but you felt you needed it just as more of a defensive measure.
Right. It's in there just so that I can put something out, get a couple of points of damage in, or hopefully just block their 2/2 or 3/2 and not take 8 from it. Because as you can see, I don't really have 2-drops. Basilicus Creature is a good card, but black is my splash. I only have 4 or 5 sources, so I'm not even expecting to be able to cast this on turn 2 every time.
Sure.
Cruel Warrior is a 2-drop that does very little in the early game, a lot in the late game, potentially.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, this is not a lot of... This card basically costs 3 mana because it doesn't do anything on turn 1 or 2. You aren't going to chump block with it on the second turn.
Of course.
Right? So...
But it does supply a little bit of a defensive measure.
On turn 3.
Exactly.
On turn 3, but it doesn't do anything on turn 1 or 2. So basically, I don't do anything really on turn 1 or 2. This is what I have. So that could lead me to fall behind.
So on the early turns, you're just looking to establish mana with gates, and if you get one of these 2 or 1 drops, that's fantastic, but it's not usually going to happen. Right. That leads me to the next question of, you're basically doing 8 things on turn 3 if we're counting Centaur Herald along with these. To some people who are paying a lot of attention to a precise mana curve, perhaps someone would have decided to not play one of the weaker cards, which I assume you need your mana accelerants because of the top-heavy nature of your deck, but perhaps some people would have cut a Selesnya Sentry or one of the evolved creatures. Do you feel that you have too many 3-drops in this deck? Is that one thing that you were disappointed with?
Right, well, I would love to turn a 3-drop into a 2-drop. Clearly, this is not an ideal mana curve here, having like 1 real 1-drop, 2/2s, and then a bunch of things to do on turn 3, and then a couple 4s, couple 5s. Post 3-drops, I'm not really worried about the curve, because with the accelerants, I might go right to 5, and like, I have plenty to do, so I'm going to do different things on different turns depending on what my opponents are doing.
Gotcha.
So it's not as though I'm looking to have an exact number of 4s and an exact number of 5s, but I would love, absolutely love, to turn these into good 2-drops, let's say. If these just happen to be more of these Crow Warriors, let's say, if I could turn these Battering Processes into Crow Warriors, I think my deck would get significantly better, because then I would have something to do on turn 2 that is reasonable almost every game.
In addition to that, it would give you the flexibility to sometimes be on the beatdown. Even with the limited early game cards that you had in this deck, you know, things happen limited. Sometimes your opponent's missing a land drop. I did see you start Drive Militant Warrior on multiple occasions and get 8 or 10 points of damage.
Right. That's a great point, Joe, because I mean, like, people always want to be so focused on their plan, and yeah, I mean, it's good to have some synergy in a plan, but in reality, you know, one game your opponent's going to not draw you when he's on the play with 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, and you need your defense in your late game. Another game, he's going to be stuck on 3 holding bombs that are better than what you have, and you know, you can't do it all, but you do want to have a good curve, and you do want to have the ability to go whatever direction you need in given games. That is a strength.
Absolutely. Along the same lines, I'm always enjoying any application for Golgari, even before Golgari was a term. I love black and green for limited, but as much as I love this card, the skeleton, I was afraid you wouldn't be able to put it to good use in this deck. It can't block. You're not taking advantage of it with Scavenge. You're looking to just accelerate to these bombs. However, you're still playing it in the deck. What kind of decision did you have to go through there, and did it perform for you?
Yeah, so I'm not going to lie.